At this point, we've established that the media plays a significant role and really an increasing role in our day-to-day lives in the 21st century, but also that there's many different theories for how we can interpret the effects of that exposure to the media on the way our society functions, whether it has positive or negative consequences, both on the societal level as well as on the micro level and how we view ourselves and interact with others. It's also important just to think about how the effects of the media sometimes are intentional and sometimes are not. So let's look at two types of intentional media effects. The one case we have short-term intentional effects, and that is you see something and the intended desire of the advertiser is for you to respond immediately to that, right? So if you're driving down the street and you see a billboard for a new item available at a fast food restaurant, we know what they want. They want you to go in and spend your money there as soon as possible. However, some types of media aren't seeking immediate gratification or some initial response. They're actually seeking a longer-term response. And this is what pops to mind. This was an ad that was really popular when I was younger. And actually it's kind of a spoof on the ad, but it was a public service announcement about drugs and sort of the negative effect of drugs on the user. And so it showed an egg in a carton, and it said, "This is your brain," and then it cracked the egg and threw it on a frying pan, and you watch this egg get fried up, and it said, "This is your brain on drugs." And I mean, that stuck with me. I can still like visualize that ad today, and the goal of it was not to just immediately think, okay, I'm not going to use drugs today. The goal is that it creates a long-term change of pattern of behavior. So this would be a long-term intentional effects. And a lot of like public service announcement type things would fall into this category. Then we have unintentional, short-term unintentional consequences. So for example, you see an ad for a video game, and then maybe your behavior directly after a video game is showing an intense amount of violence is slightly more violent, or your reaction is with more anger than it was prior to watching that video game. That's a short-term effect, and it also may not be intentional. That's maybe not the goal of this specific video game, or the advertisement of the video game was to make you more violent. However, perhaps exposure to that type of violence would lead to some short-term behavioral changes. On the other hand, we have these long-term unintentional consequences of some of the media that we watch. And, you know, Carl's Jr. gets a bad rap for the way that women are portrayed in their advertisements. And there is an intentional effect to putting women in these advertisements. It's supposed to use sex to sell, right? So that is intentional. But I don't think what they intended with creating this line of advertisements, it's considered a little bit more on the edge or scandalous, is the fact that this really shapes how young girls view their bodies, right? And so when they're exposed over and over and over to these images of supermodels, scantily clad and sexy, it sort of creates this idea in women about what they should be, right? And so maybe unintentional consequences of this are things like eating disorders and body dissatisfaction among women. And although some media scholars would argue that is intentional, because when we feel dissatisfied about our bodies, we want to do something about it, and when we want to do something about it, we look to products to consume that can help to meet these desires that we have, right? So, but I would argue that for Carl's Jr., they're not intending to do that. That doesn't help them sell more unhealthy burgers. On the other hand, it is an unintentional effect of the type of marketing strategy that they are employing. Now, when we talk about consumer culture, we're using that term there, consumerism. And consumerism is being taught that material possessions will provide you happiness and fulfillment. And really, our exposure to this consumeristic kind of belief system starts at birth. You know, like Disney loves to get into hospitals and get branded items into hospitals so that as soon as the child is born, pretty much they're branded with an icon that will potentially bring back thousands of dollars to the business. Huggies and Pampers, they go after those hospital clientele because they feel like if they can just get parents to believe that that's the best brand to meet the needs of their child, then it'll have lifelong customers, right? And so we brand ourselves. Just think about how many clothing items you own that have a swoosh on it or another logo or emblem that is representative of a company. Essentially, you're paying to market their gear, right? But we don't just wear that stuff because we think it looks cool. We wear that stuff because it actually sends off a symbol to other people, right? So if you're really sporty and you wear a certain type of athletic clothing that's branded, you're sending a message to other people that you're legitimate within your field. Or for example, I have a lot of friends who are into things like backpacking and stuff, and so REI, if you wear REI branded stuff, or Patagonia or Columbia or whatever, it's sending a message to other people that you're like a legitimate person in this subculture. And so, again, these brands have symbolic meaning. We make associations in our head with different branded items. You see a Coach purse and you think differently about that person holding a Coach purse than you do the person that's holding, a nondescript purse from Target or something. Same thing goes with shoes, right? We see certain types of shoes, brands, types, and it sends us messages. And so what the brands themselves that are marketing are trying to make us develop these connections between their product and some type of image of yourself or other people. And that draws us to spend money on it. Because let's be honest, sometimes the $200 pair of jeans or shoes work just as well as a $20 pair of jeans or shoes. But when that brand is attached to it, we attach different meaning. And that meaning is something that not only it matters to us, but we think it matters to other people as well. So it sends signals about our social class to other people. And you'll see a portion of a video where it's interviewing a researcher who studied this idea of, well, how does it affect how much income a family has and their likelihood of kind of this purchasing power? And she did find there's some real differences between how low income and middle income families approach this idea of spending, because we all feel this pressure because we're all in a social environment. We're exposed to these messages all the time, but perhaps we understand or interpret our choices about buying differently based on things like how much finances we have available to us. Now, I wouldn't argue that there's something wrong with consuming necessarily in terms of our culture, because in our culture, it's very much wrapped up in our ideology and our value system, right? So we value this idea of material success through the American dream, and often what we do to signal that we have been successful are the things that we own, whether or not it's that house with the white picket fence, or certain gadgets. I love this image. It's got the boat in the background, the Doughboy pool, the Coleman stove, a certain type of bike. But in essence, isn't that what we're doing to show other people that we've made it? So our culture doesn't place a negative value on consumerism. In fact, a lot of what it means to meet the values of our society, like the American dream, is to really immerse ourselves in this consumerist culture. And so not only is it signaling something about our social status, but it's signaling how closely we align to the values of our society when we are consumers. Now, there is a movement that really is seeking to draw attention to the problems with this consumerism. And one of the ways they do this is by taking those symbols that we associate with brands and really using it to bring to light some of the problems with these industries, right? Enjoy capitalism, just make it. This Nike swoosh is actually a response to allegations that Nike was using sweatshop child labor to make many of their products, right? So by using that same logo and image, it is reminding us both who they're talking about, but also drawing a direct critique of it. Or iAddict, right? Like we can all identify this image with the way that, Apple products have been marketed to us. but maybe instead of thinking about it as selling the product, they're critiquing the product, right? Talking about things like electronic use and addiction to internet, etc. And then, YouTube, right, it has the same logo, but instead cat videos, just distract yourself. And so these are ways that, media companies that are trying to speak out against sort of the rise of consumerism and really look at how problematic it could be for us as individuals or for our society or globally is by poking fun using imagery and symbols that we already make connections with. Now, this is called culture jamming, and culture jamming is about turning the media against itself. It's showing that these ads are really propaganda, right? So when Apple is selling products, they're also trying to sell us on the addiction to consumer electronics because it makes them money. And so they're not really considering us as the individual. They're trying to lure us into a way of life that is beneficial to them, but perhaps harmful to us. And it's interesting because some name brand, companies are also using this type of advertising or marketing to try to show that they understand everyone, right? So a great example of this are the Dove ads, right? So trying to celebrate the real woman instead of this idealized version of a woman. So for example, the campaign for Real Beauty here has withered or wonderful, fat or fit, flawed or flawless, trying to encourage us to reinterpret these messages that we have made certain associations with and trying to make new associations. The sort of ironic thing, though, is that Dove is also owned by the same company that owns Axe, Unilever. And Unilever is actually not on the forefront of promoting sort of a healthy version of women. Axe is very much known for sort of sexualizing women. In this case, showing women as sort of dependent and physically, meeting this beauty ideal standard. So both of these, one that seems to be fighting against one image of femininity and another that seems to be reinforcing it, is all owned by the same company, Unilever. So something we have to be cautious about is the fact that sometimes culture jamming is used by marketers to still get the same outcome, which is our consumer dollars, right? Whereas other types of campaigns, whether or not it is independent organizations that are, for or against a certain thing, like PETA will send out advertisements about, animals and protecting the rights of animals, or there's an organization called Adbusters. It's just all about bringing to light how much we consume and some of the negative effects of this consumption. But I think it's just the last thing I want to stick with you is the idea that consumption isn't an abnormal thing. It's very normalized within our own culture. However, because perhaps these advertisements are owned by people in positions of power, that we are taught, directed to look at them in a certain way. And the way that we look at them sometimes means that we overlook other aspects of these consumerist behaviors, such as, does it really fulfill all our needs? Do we really feel happier when we consume things? Although I love my good Target run, the reality is probably what's much more fulfilling for me than going on a Target run after a long day would be to spend quality time with other people. And yet we've been taught through consumption culture that the Target time will do the trick, right? Or buying that shirt or going out to that movie, right, will fill that need. And perhaps we're being misdirected in the way that we spend our time and our money and really understanding the effects of these consumer choices that we make.